Now, speaking of someone who I think has been listening to you, Robert, the Indiana University lawsuit, it's Claassen versus Indiana U, and they are challenging what they're calling the COVID mandate or the COVID restrictions of this university. I took a screenshot because I'll read it out loud. The requirements of this university in order to go back to university. I'm just going to read this here. It is Claassen versus Indiana University. Students have challenged all parts of Indiana University's mandate. Indiana University's mandate is multifaceted. It requires inter alia that all students, faculty, and staff, 1, receive one of the available COVID vaccines, 2, require their vaccination status, or 3, obtain an exemption, and 4, comply with the extra requirements if such exemption is granted, or 5, be virtually expelled. These extra requirements include inter alia, participating in twice-a-week COVID testing and mandatory face masks in public spaces. Okay, so these are what students are being forced to face going back to university at Indiana University. They filed suit. I mean, basically, that's the essence of the suit, but elaborate and let the people know in greater detail what they need to know about this lawsuit, the status of it, and where it's going.
So they just had the oral argument last week. Judge said he'll be issuing a ruling forthwith on whether or not this mandate is constitutional, because this is a state university, so they're subject to constitutional limitations, unlike private universities in many contexts. So Notre Dame has also issued a equally harsh rule and restriction, and it too, of course, is in the state of Indiana. But this decision will have broad impact because at the front of the line of the COVID vaccine mandates are a bunch of public universities and private universities. And so where this case goes will have a lot of bearing on those future cases against those other universities and whether those universities stick with their existing protocols and policies. And it goes to the core of, whether or not they can mandate this, because some universities and states have been smart, and employers, they've said, we're not going to mandate this until it is an FDA approved vaccine. At this stage, this is an emergency use authorized vaccine. And so he brought the claims that are pretty analogous to the claims that we've been talking about and that I've articulated at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. I have a whole closing argument against COVID vaccine mandates, coerced COVID vaccines, as I call them. And we'll be talking to Bobby Kennedy this week because we figured we'd go with people that are low profile and low controversial. Last week we very low profile, low controversial guy, and this week definitely low profile, low controversial guy.
Now I'm going to just let out one thing, because I'm not saying it to needle the beast of YouTube. That stream was demonetized about halfway through. I think it was at the jokes that Alex was giving. I looked it over before submitting a request for manual review, because it said, other than the jokes, other than maybe some discussion about the Iraq war, I didn't think there was anything objectionable in that. I asked for a manual review, and they remonetized after manual review. And the only reason I care about this, that would be one stream of 70 that we've done, more than that, 100 and some odd that we've done in a year. I only care about them suppressing that when they demonetize a video, a stream. You see it in the views, and you see it in the spread. I was just happy that maybe it shows a bit of a turning of the tide at YouTube. Maybe it shows they're a little bit more desperate for the money. Or, at the very least, people can see that stream now, and YouTube can never take that away. But
no doubt. But
I'm a little concerned about the one with RFK. I'm concerned because I know YouTube now might have more of an issue with anything that is deemed to be medical advice on COVID than AJ. Maybe Alex Jones is not on YouTube's bad boy list as much as it was, but a little concerned. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, and the thing is, Bobby Kennedy doesn't purport to give medical advice. He gives the legal arguments why people should make their own decisions, and he provides government records and other medical doctors to say here's what their opinions are. And that's pretty much it. But he's been aggressively targeted, and so the Indiana suit is the tip of the spear. Hopefully, the judge takes it seriously, because in my view, an emergency use authorized vaccine is supposed to conform to the Nuremberg Code of 1947, which means it's not supposed to be mandated, period, by anybody, anywhere, anyplace, anytime, until it becomes an FDA-approved vaccine. Then the other thing with this is some of these vaccine mandates are not, and apparently this was true of the Indiana University, one of their subclass groups, are people who have already got COVID. And so according to the available medical literature we have so far, is that if you've already got COVID, you are as, or even in some cases, more, according to Congressman Thomas Massie and others, may have more immunity than what a vaccine can provide for. And so it's like, why are they not excluding that group? I mean, if you've already had COVID, why are you requiring that group? It seems more and more like this is more about government coercion than public health. When you're requiring people who have already got the vaccine, already got the COVID, the disease that's you're already immune from, to require them to get a vaccine. So they have a lot of good arguments they've outlined, including the Nuremberg Code of 1947, including the emergency use authorization limitation, including just looking at the math on this. And the math on this still hasn't changed from my debate. We didn't get into the math, but we got into the legal standard with Professor Alan Dershowitz. And he agreed. And he's very pro-vaccine in this context, has even debated Bobby Kennedy on this precise topic as well. But he agreed that in order to compel a vaccine, there needs to be substantial evidence that not getting it presents a severe risk of harm to other people. And it has to be a substantial risk of severe harm. And right now, if the only thing a COVID vaccine does is protect asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic people from causing harm to others, that risk is microscopic at this point, especially as more and more other people have already got vaccinated. So you're talking about an unvaccinated person spreading it to another unvaccinated person only in their pre-symptomatic, asymptomatic stage, especially on a college campus, which is one of the lowest risk populations in the country. So I think it will be if they can mandate this vaccine, even at this stage of emergency use, they can mandate any medical treatment they want, anytime they want, anywhere they want. Your bodily integrity is gone. Informed consent is dead.
I think a lot of people already see that, and a lot of people see the justification for compelling the vaccination in a certain demographic who themselves, again, I don't want to say anything that can be deemed to be scientific statements. Demographics who are at minimal risk of the virus, to compel it there, the argument is that you're doing it there to prevent, like you say, the asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic spread, which might get to the adults. So effectively, you're imposing a medical treatment or a medical intervention on a group at low risk, not for their own benefit, but for the indirect benefit of groups who are at higher risk, who in theory have already gotten or will get the vaccine and should have already protected themselves. So it's this double overlap of protection, but compelling it on a demographic that is not inherently at any meaningful risk by all stats.
I'll put it this way. I believe the evidence that will be alleged in these suits is that the risk of someone in a pre-symptomatic, asymptomatic stage spreading COVID that causes someone else to suffer severe harm or death from getting it is microscopic and minuscule. My guess is less than one, maybe as low as 1 in a million. And if they can force you to take an invasive medical treatment into your body for a 1 in a million risk, well, heck, they can mandate the flu shot. They can mandate anything. They can just start mandating whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want. And that's why, at a minimum, this case needs to establish the legal standards that limit the ability. When can they force this? When can they require it? What data and evidence is substantiated? Because ultimately, Dershowitz and I agreed on what the legal standard is. And I believe that the evidence at this point doesn't justify such a coercive compelling of invasive medical treatment.
I mean, that is the bottom line. Is you and Dersh did agree on the substance. It's only a question of applying it to the particular facts at hand, and whether or not you perceive or anyone perceives this virus as being the one that meets the required threshold in order to justify what would otherwise be for the measles. But even for the measles, I mean, yeah, you can't get into kindergarten if you don't have your shots, unless you have some sort of medical exemption. But the idea there is,
or in most places, actually is a good transition. Most places, a religious exemption to protect your First Amendment religious rights as well as your parental rights over governing the well-being of your children. And so that leads to Bobby Kennedy and others bringing suit in the District of Columbia, because the District of Columbia gives us a further script. Like the federal criminal case shows us one thing, Indiana University case shows us another thing, the DC case shows us the final conclusion of all this, for what Bill Gates himself called the final solution. Just might want to add that.
But pause that there. The final solution, the big lie, and COVID deniers or vacciniers. All three of these terms are based in Holocaust terms, and people are using them without fully appreciating that the big lie was an Adolf Hitler propaganda strategy. the final solution, we know what that was. And what was the other one I just said? Oh, Robert,
Deniers.
Deniers. They turn Holocaust deniers into climate change deniers, into COVID deniers, into vaccine deniers. Everything has this implicit comparison back to the Holocaust, so they can demonize people with different opinions, as though to have those opinions is to be tantamount, consciously or subconsciously, to denying the Holocaust. It hurts me, but sorry.
Unless you're Bill Gates, and then you say final solution, and you get all excited. The just to see how many times that guy smiles during a video where he's talking about all this. By the way, if people don't believe there's any public warnings about side effects associated with this particular medical treatment that's now being coerced everywhere, just go back and listen to Kamala Harris during the campaign, listen to Joe Biden during the campaign, listen to Bill Gates describe it, where he kept getting smiles as he said, oh, then this can happen, and then this bad thing can happen, and then, man, there's something wrong with that dude. But putting that aside, the genius of the suit being brought by Bobby Kennedy is what happened is the District of Columbia passed a law that is going to allow the school systems to inject your the children that attend those schools with the COVID vaccine without their parents even knowing about it, without any parental consent. But they take it a second step. Speaking of fraudulent documents, the law requires the doctors to forge the vaccine records documents of these kids' school records, so the parents don't know what happened, and to send one set of records over to the school and a different set of records to the parents that don't disclose what took place. And in particular, like DC, like most places, recognizes First Amendment rules and has a religious exemption. So all that's required is a good faith basis to acquire that. As well as a medical exemption. What they're doing is they're circumventing religious exemptions and medical exemptions that are actually already in the law as well by doing this, because they're just getting the kid. If you're 11 years old or over, and as one of the DC council members who objected to this said, my 12-year-old can't figure out how to play Fortnite, and I'm going to give him control over his own body for a big decision? I don't think so.
And we've talked about this a couple of times. Ontario has the Youth Health Act, or they call it something along those lines. British Columbia as well, which basically says that the kids can consent to medical treatment, either in the absence of or notwithstanding parental opposition, if they have a doctor's approval. And the court, the doctor, and the kid thinks it's in their best interest. This has been used in transitioning cases, and this has been used now in vaccination situations where they're basically saying, yeah, if the kid wants it and the parents object, the kid can do it. And like I said, one thing I said, I don't care how mature the kid is. It's not like a 12-year-old knows their medical history in the first place to even, maybe they had an allergic reaction to something when they were kids, and they just don't know, because 12-year-olds, I don't want to say they're idiots, they're 12-year-olds, and they don't know their own history. So it's over the top in terms of what the government is allowing 12-year-old kids to do in the absence of consent, in the face of objection, or in the ignorance of their own parental duties. And it's over the top, but it's what some might feel to be in the government assuming the role of God, and the government assuming the role of parents, of everyone. Sorry,
and it's
over. Go ahead.
It's a very well brought suit by Bobby Kennedy, challenging the first and foremost, this is a due process violation over the parents' rights to control their children's own health and well-being. Public school is not supposed to be a replacement or substitute for that. They cite a bunch of U.S. Supreme Court cases on this, and the general principle that the schools are not substitute parents. The schools do not have this authority to act in a godlike manner. But also, Bobby Kennedy's actually been one of the best advocates. In 2000, we passed a religious rights protection law. I forget the exact phraseology, but basically it provided stronger protection when the Supreme Court was busy watering down the First Amendment freedom of religion. It created a statutory protection that expanded that against a wide range of actors, including state governments. And what it pointed out was that you needed to meet strict scrutiny if you're going to burden in any way religious rights. And it's always been recognized your right to religious exemption from coerced medical treatment of your own children. And so in that context, he points out this violates the statute as well. And then other claims as well. It's a very well drafted complaint, well designed complaint, well planned out complaint. and we'll talk about it a little bit more with him on Wednesday. But it's this is another. Now you're in the District of Columbia, so good luck with those judges. You got to hope you get the right draw. But this is another critical case, because if the government can use access to children through schools or childcare programs or anything else to circumvent parental control over their own children's bodily integrity, then we're in a scary new place.
And I'll say this: I brought up a couple of chats which less eloquently address the problem. The problem is this: a 12-year-old doesn't know the medical history. They're 12 years old, and people are saying, well, if these restrictions, these court interventions were generally, historically, and legally put in place to prevent the parent from depriving the kid of life-saving treatment, as opposed to how it's being used today. And for anybody who says that 12-year-olds are so mature that they can change their gender if they so choose, despite the parental objection, they can take medications. I mean, on the one hand, the obvious argument is, can a 12-year-old get a tattoo if they really, 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 really want one? Can they start drinking alcohol and smoking if they really, 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 really want to? And not to equate vaccines to that. The issue is to say, if a 12-year-old is so mature that they should be able to make these decisions themselves, the law already provides for that. I suspect you have the same emancipation laws that we have in Canada. If a minor is so damn mature that they can lead their lives in the absence of their parental guidance, notwithstanding their parents, and on their own, get emancipated by the court, go through the full test to see that you're fully able to be recognized as emancipated, notwithstanding your minorhood status, and then make whatever decision you want. But this is it's like punctual emancipation on political hot topics. Oh, gender issues, you're emancipated for that specific decision, but not for getting a job and learning about the economy. Vaccine, you're politically emancipated, but not for what television shows you watch, not for smoking, not for getting into watch American Pie because it's 16 and over, whatever. It's politicizing literally of infants or children. And we already have laws that respond to this problem that could just be that can be applied to resolve the problem without bypassing, circumventing, and in some places concealing from the parents what is being done to their kids. It's egregious, but my biggest problem is that the media has done a very good job demonizing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to such a point that people reflexively, like with Alex Jones, think he's an extremist vax denier. Or anti-vaxxer. We're going to get into it more on Wednesday, but it's like people in the chat are probably more wise than the general public.
The MIT did a study, and they assumed that they were going to find that people that were hesitant or skeptical of the COVID vaccines were less educated and lower IQ and more misinformed. They found just the opposite, that if you gave them a COVID test, a COVID vaccine test, they would score the highest. They were the smartest, brightest, most informed. And that's because, this is when I suggested a year ago, this is where they were going. I had tons of people say that I was just being conspiratorial and had been hanging out with Alex too much. Well, here we are, folks, where they're going to such lengths that the schools are demanding that that medical professionals lie to parents and forge documents in order to cover up what's taking place, while they're busy prosecuting people for presenting alternatives. It's money. Well, if you don't agree with the government, you go to prison. If you go along with the government, you need to do forged and fraudulent documents to deceive parents. So it's a deeply disturbing law that hopefully Bobby Kennedy's suit will successfully overturn.
And I've been having a discussion with a friend from the day one. Sure, there's a risk the government's going to overreach, and you're going to lose some rights, and the government's not going to be reluctant. You're going to be reluctant to give them back. We have gone from 2 weeks to flatten the curve, to shutting down businesses, to preventing people from having their own family in their houses, to force social isolation, social distancing, to curfew, to required mask mandates, to compelled vaccination, and now we're in the realm of criminalizing, to some extent, speech. It's not the gambler's paradox. It's just that people have now given up so much. They have to justify their losses to themselves and say, well, it's for the greater good, so I feel good about it. Like, no joke, whenever you go to a casino and you see a big loser, at the very least in Canada, because the casinos are sort of province run, It was like, yeah, okay, fine. So I lost $1,000. It goes to the government. It's going to go help communities. That's the justification for having lost your money. And right now, people have lost their freedoms, and the justification is basically the same for the greater good. But for people who said they're going to go too far, they've gone too far, but people cannot recognize it or they cannot admit it anymore because they've lost too much.
And I'll be looking at filing suits over the next several weeks against, looking at suits against pilots unions, looking at suits for cops in San Francisco, looking at suits for employees at Madison Square Garden across the country related to these coerced COVID vaccines that don't have the health, medical, or religious exemptions that really it needs to have if it's going to conform to constitutional standards. People are in a rush to do this. But speaking of things that they think an 11-year-old can change their body forever, including even maybe changing their gender without even parental consent being involved or parental knowledge being involved. Well, at the same time, they have laws that they're cheering on that prohibit 20-year-olds from even owning a handgun.